I was once given a necklace with 3 charms on it. There was a cross, an anchor, and a heart. The cross stood for faith, the anchor for hope, and the heart was for love. Faith, hope, and love, bound together forever by Paul's writing in 1 Corinthians 13. And the greatest of these 3, Paul says, the best of them isn't faith, as good as faith is, because faith will one day become sight, and faith will turn into knowledge. And the greatest of these isn't hope, as good as hope is, because hope will one day end in fulfillment, or if you're unfortunate, disappointment. And so hope will also end. But both faith and hope are grounded or rooted in love, which never ends. And so love is the greatest of these 3. We've been reading the past few weeks from 1 Corinthians chapter 12 about the different spiritual gifts. And Paul starts off this next chapter by saying that even if he has great spiritual gifts like teaching and prophecy and speaking in tongues, and all those ones we talked about a couple weeks ago, even if he has these great gifts but doesn't have love, he's like a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Even if he has faith that can move mountains but doesn't have love, then he is nothing. And even if he gives everything away and sacrifices everything but doesn't have love, then he gains nothing. And so love is necessary for all these things to have meaning, because otherwise they don't make any sense. But love binds them all together. Even though 1 Corinthians 13 is quite often read nowadays at Christian weddings, it wasn't originally written to address love between a couple. The church at Corinth that Paul wrote to was made up of several small house churches with around 30 people or so meeting in each one. And so a group of people a little bit smaller than ourselves who came together in someone's house for worship. Must have been a good-sized house, right? And among that group was a bit of diversity. People from different classes, different backgrounds. And because of that diversity, there was a bit of conflict. And so Paul's first letter to the Corinthians is a letter to a community that's having trouble staying together, having trouble figuring out how to all get along. And that's why Paul talks about love in this chapter 13. There are guidelines for how this small church can stay together and keep worshiping together. Good guidelines also for a marriage, yes, and good guidelines for a church. I wanted to include that last verse of chapter 12 this morning because it's an introduction really to the whole passage. Paul writes there, strive for the greater gifts, as he wraps up chapter 12 about the different spiritual gifts, and then says, I will show you still a more excellent way, that better way being love. However, if you look at the original Greek, it doesn't actually say something like a more excellent way, but more like a way beyond measuring. That love is a way beyond measuring. And that's important because these early Corinthians were measuring themselves and their abilities and their status relative to one another. And it became something of an obsession in that small church. And so Paul wanted to move them past all of that to a way that was beyond measuring. Love is the way that can set them free from the competition that was disrupting that church. Competition is about measuring and comparing, and while it's healthy to an extent, and encouraging each other to be better, it can also become unhealthy and disruptive if we're always trying to one-up each other or keep up with the Joneses, so to speak. Now, measurement can be healthy when it keeps track of where we've been. For instance, a couple weeks ago, all the churches in our conference had to submit our annual statistical reports for 2015. And if you compare 2014 and 2015, there are several significant differences I'd like to share with you all. I may even put these on a chart up in the bulletin board in the back. So these are things that you guys need to know. For instance, our average worship attendance in 2014, this is now 2 years ago, was 37. Last year it was 44. 2 years ago we averaged 3 children in worship. Last year we had 7 involved in Sunday school. This one was one of my favorite, and I pointed out to Keith, and Keith agreed. This is quite a good one. The number of households that give on a regular basis to the church in 2014 was 33 households. Last year it was 42. It's a 25% increase, give or take. It's a significant increase. That is fantastic. Offering received went up from about 53,000 to about 62,000. And that was not even counting the capital campaign for the parsonage HVAC. And then the other stat to point out is our apportionment. This is the money we send into the conference. In 2014, we sent in a total of $100. Last year, we paid 100%. We paid them all off. And I share these measurements. They are achievements to be celebrated, not causes for remorse. This is looking back at where we've been, where we are now, not for disruption or mourning, but in a loving way that honors our past, accepts where we've been and where we are now. And that's why love is a way that's beyond measuring, beyond competition. My husband and I both have a healthy sense of competition, and at times fall into a trap of trying to outdo each other with, who had the worst event of the day. And he'll talk about, a 2-hour commute in the rain on 95 in traffic. And I'll say, well, AJ Sliper exploded. And the thing is, that kind of comparison isn't healthy. And it wasn't helpful or nurturing to our relationship. What we need when we talk about bad events isn't someone trying to say, well, I had it worse. But what we're really looking for is sympathy for our plight. Someone to say, yeah, that was awful. I'm sorry you had to sit in traffic for 2 hours in the rain on 95. A listening ear is what we need, not competition. When we're hurting or when we're celebrating, when we're sharing, we want to be received with love and not with a measurement. That verses 4 through 8 in our passage have 16 statements, in 4 verses, 16 statements about love. And you can tell that love is a busy, active thing that never ceases to work. It's always finding ways to express itself for the good of others. And we hear love shows patience, love acts with kindness. Love doesn't give in to jealousy, love doesn't brag. It doesn't compare negatively or one-up because it doesn't even keep record of wrongs. Those statistics are not a record of wrongs. They're simply a record of where we've been, for better or worse, which is how love is. Love doesn't end. It's there for better or worse, for the good times and the bad times. And that's what love does. Concrete things like shoveling snow for a neighbor here at the church, visiting the sick, feeding the homeless, working to build up our life together, doing the little things that need doing here around the church, listening to those who need a listening ear, helping out where you can, refraining from criticism and unhelpful comparisons. This description of love that Paul writes isn't meant to be this flowery, beautiful, abstract thing. It's a more concrete description of what love does, and especially what love does to one's brother and sister in the church. What Paul's been talking about all along here is getting along in the church, how to be Christ's body together. And so he tells us about how love works and what love does. Love that is real love, unconditional, steadfast. Love that comes from God. The last of those 16 statements is that love never ends. And it never ends because God's love never ends or fails or falters. God loves you. And we are to love each other how Christ loved us, laying down his life for his friends. Not to be trampled on like a doormat or abused, because Paul does say that love isn't happy with injustice. Yet he also says love is patient and kind. Love doesn't put up with excuses, like that excuse Jeremiah tries to give in our Old Testament reading. Jeremiah says, I'm too young, I can't do it, God. And God says, don't say you're too young, or too old, perhaps. And at the same time reassures him, don't be afraid, I will be with you. That's how love works. And it's interesting because Paul doesn't ever talk about how love makes us feel. He doesn't say, if you do all this, you should feel good about yourself. He doesn't actually talk about feelings at all, which is kind of funny since in our pop culture day we're told, love is a feeling. But here, love isn't measured or isn't talked about by how good it makes us feel. In 1 Corinthians, it would be better to say that the measure of love is its capacity for tension and disagreement without division. And that's the beauty of the witness of the church. When it works well and we truly love each other. We don't always get along. We're not always going to see eye to eye, because the church is not meant to be a group of like-minded individuals. We're meant to be the family of Christ. And as each of us know, in families, there are always disagreements. We don't always all get along. But in healthy families and healthy relationships, there's room for those disagreements, and they don't tear apart the family. We can still stay in relationship with each other because we love each other, and that love comes first before any opinion or fact. Love trumps all. And when we know that, then we have room for differences without division. I know it's been a problem in the past, and it's a problem whenever you have two or more people in a room. But Isabel gave me the perfect example this past week in the car. She was telling me on the way home from school, Nathan is my best friend, but he doesn't like purple. I like pink and purple. Nathan doesn't like purple. That's okay. I like purple all by myself. And I didn't realize at the time. I was remembering it later going, that's fantastic. That's great to be best friends. You don't have to agree on everything. You don't have to like the same colors. And to be in church, we don't have to all agree on everything. And when we know we love each other and that all is said and done is out of love, then we can weather all kinds of storms, whether they break records and close the church or not. Because when folks enjoy being together and they share celebrations and walk through the hard times with grace and love, the beauty of that shared life becomes deeply compelling. And something about us is compelling enough that folks want to join us. This morning we're welcoming 2 new members among us. They're coming in with their eyes open. They've been here for almost a year worshiping with us. And they know that there's some differences among us, and they know that we love each other. And we've come to know and love them as well, even if you don't know Emma's mom's name. I've realized this. Everyone knows Emma. Emma's mom, proper name is Jennifer, so that you all are aware. And so this morning we welcome them with open arms. Emma and Jennifer, if you'd come on up forward. And if the congregation would turn to page 33, please, in your hymnal.